Milo Venn accepted the sublet because rent was due in 6 hours, his landlord had a hobby of charging breathing fees, and in Hive Tarsus you can survive many things: industrial smog, ration sausage, even motivational sermons, but you cannot survive eviction, not unless you can live comfortably inside an air duct and enjoy the taste of insulation. The imminent problem: Milo's new roommate was a world eater, and Milo's lease had a quiet hours clause. For the record, quiet hours in Habstack 19 were from 2100 to 0600, plus anytime someone is trying to forget they live in Habstack 19. Violations were tracked by the building's resident compliance officer, a woman named Mrs. Durn, who treated sound the way the ecclesiarchy treats unlicensed joy. The first note in the file is Milo's handwritten entry, recovered from a cheap slate with a cracked corner. "He's huge. He's red. He said, 'Hello, small room friend.' I think he meant it." The second note is stamped by the administratum. "Unauthorized handwriting. Please resubmit in triplicate." So, let us proceed with the sanctioned version. Milo lived in a Hab unit that could generously be described as one room with ambitions. It had a cot, a hot plate, and a vent that whispered prayers at night because the building's air system had once been blessed by someone who didn't read the manual. His previous roommate had been an accountant who vanished after saying, "I've found a way to save us money." In the Imperium, that is a suspicious sentence. Milo had two options: take a new roommate or sell his furniture, which was difficult because his furniture was mostly attached to the floor by rust and despair. That was when he saw the listing. Not on a sanctioned bulletin, not on a proper data slate. It was a scrap of parchment pinned to the stairwell notice board with a knife. "Room for rent. I pay in full. I do not steal your food. I am working on myself. Ask for Gorhak." There were little tear-off tabs at the bottom. Milo took one. He later claimed, under oath, that he did not notice the tab was made of human skin until he got home. The case file does not contain his oath because it was eaten by a filing servitor. The servitor was later found with a satisfied expression and a slight spiritual glow. Anyway, Milo met Gorhak in the hallway outside Unit 19 Delta 6, which is the sort of place where the lighting flickers for religious reasons and the walls are painted the color of tired. Gorhak arrived exactly on time. He arrived on time because he was 7 feet of muscle and armor, and being late was something the universe simply did not attempt. He wore battered crimson plate with brass trim. He had spikes, he had trophies, he had a chain axe the length of Milo's entire torso, held casually like a commuter holding an umbrella. He also had a small paper bag. He lifted it with surprising gentleness and said, "I brought a gift." Milo, who had spent most of his adult life negotiating with people who would absolutely stab him for a discount, asked, "Is it a bomb?" Gorhak looked genuinely offended. "No." He opened the bag. Inside were 3 ration bars and a jar of something labeled in neat block letters, peanut paste. "I have been told this is how room friends bond, by sharing food and not screaming." Milo did not scream, this is important. He did, however, make a sound like a kettle losing faith. Gorhak nodded approvingly. "Good, we will try not screaming first." Milo's landlord, Madame Clasp, chose that moment to appear. Landlords are like daemons. They do not enter a room, they manifest in your peripheral vision when your finances are weakest. Madame Clasp was narrow, sharp, and dressed in black like a funeral that hadn't decided what it was mourning yet. She carried a data slate and the expression of someone who enjoyed rules the way some people enjoy sunlight. Her eyes moved up Gorehack's armor, over the spikes, paused on the chain axe, and then, astonishingly, settled on Milo. "Milo Venn," she said. "Subletting requires Form 88B, signed by myself and 2 witnesses who are not intoxicated." "I can get witnesses," Milo squeaked. Madame Clasp ignored him and pointed at Gorhak like she just found a stain on the carpet. "And that," she said, "is a fire hazard." Gorhak leaned down slightly because he had to, because ceilings are not designed for the faithful of Khorne in residential zones. "I am not on fire," he said. Madame Clasp pursed her lips. "Not yet." Gorhak considered this, then nodded. "I can work with that." Milo attempted a laugh. It came out as a sob with comedic timing. Madame Clasp flicked her slate. "If the unit is damaged, you pay. If the neighbors complain, you pay. If the neighbors stop complaining because they have mysteriously ceased to exist, you pay extra." Gorhak lifted the jar of peanut paste again. "I will not damage the unit," he promised. "I am practicing domesticity." Madame Clasp stared. Milo stared. The ventilation vent whispered, faintly, like it was taking notes. Madame Clasp sniffed. "Fine. He pays 3 months up front." Gorhak produced a cloth sack that clinked. Milo's heart sank, because clinking sacks in the Imperium are either money or teeth, and both have paperwork. Gorhak placed the sack on the counter. It was in fact money. Coins. Real ones. The kind no one had seen in Habstack 19 since the last time someone won a knife fight and upgraded to Habstack 18. Madame Clasp's eyes softened. Not emotionally, financially. She scooped the sack up, weighed it in her hand, and said, "Welcome to the building. Quiet hours are non-negotiable." Gorhak nodded gravely. "I also have quiet hours," he said. Madame Clasp blinked. "You do?" "Yes," Gorhak said. "In the field, we call them the moment before we charge." Madame Clasp stared at Milo, as if Milo had personally invented Gorhak. Then she left, retreating down the corridor with the graceful menace of a debt. The door shut. Milo slowly exhaled. Gorhak set his chain axe down in the corner, very carefully, like a beloved pet that had recently been told not to bite the furniture. Milo glanced at the jar of peanut paste. Then he remembered the building's quiet hours policy poster, which hung on his wall because Mrs. Durn had nailed it there with a hammer and an opinion. The poster included a sticker chart. This is not a metaphor. It was literally a sticker chart. Quiet hours compliance. 1 sticker for no loud machinery after 2100. 1 sticker for no unlicensed hymn singing. 2 stickers for no screaming, even if it's religious. 3 stickers for no personal duels in hallway. At the bottom was a warning in cheery script. 10 stickers earn you a compliment from Mrs. Durn. 0 stickers earn you a visit from the Arbites. Milo looked at Gorhak. Gorhak looked at the sticker chart. Gorhak's expression, limited by helmet and a life of rage, somehow conveyed genuine curiosity. "This is a honor system?" Gorhak asked. "It's sort of a threat system," Milo said. Gorhak nodded. "I like it. It has clear goals." Milo blinked. "You like goals?" "I am very goal-oriented," Gorhak said, proudly, as if this was a personality trait he had cultivated and not a cosmic affliction. Milo thought, for a hopeful second, that maybe this would work. Then he noticed Gorhak's bag. It contained the peanut paste, yes. It also contained a small brass skull, a bundle of incense, and something labeled Emotional Regulation Pamphlet. Milo pointed at the pamphlet. "What's that?" Gorhak hesitated. "A priest told me to read it when I feel enthusiasm." Milo, who had never in his life seen the World Eater use the word enthusiasm, said, "Does it help?" Gorhak stared at the pamphlet like it had once insulted his bloodline. "I have not opened it," he admitted. "The staples look challenging." Milo glanced at the staples. "I can—" Gorhak lifted one armored finger and tapped the staples. They exploded. The pamphlet fluttered open, lightly singed, to a page titled, "When you feel overwhelmed, try a calming hobby." Underneath was a list: knitting, painting, mild gardening, breathing exercises, joining a community group. Gorhak read it silently. Then he said, "I have a community group." "You do?" "Yes," Gorhak said. "They are called the 8th Legionary Support Circle." Milo swallowed. "That sounds helpful." Gorhak nodded. "We meet in abandoned factories and discuss our feelings." Milo waited. Gorhak added, "And sometimes we break things." Milo nodded too, because nodding is a survival skill. That first night, Milo attempted to set expectations like an adult. He gave Gorhak a tour of the unit. He pointed out the sink, the hot plate, the sleeping corner, the place where the wall bulged slightly because something behind it had given up. He pointed at the poster, "Quiet hours. Mrs. Durn takes it seriously." Gorhak said, "I understand. I will be quiet." Milo, in a burst of optimism that would later be described by an Arbeitsofficer as criminally naive, said, "Great." Then Milo handed Gorhak a trash bag. "Can you take the trash down to the incinerator chute? It's at the end of the corridor." Gorhak took the bag reverently. "I will complete this task," he said, with the solemnity of someone being entrusted with a holy relic. Milo watched him go, thinking, "This is fine. This is normal. My roommate is an 8-foot murder soldier, but he's being polite. Things can be polite." 5 minutes later, Mrs. Durn was hammering on Milo's door. Mrs. Durn was short, severe, and wore a sash that read "Building Compliance" in large letters, as if anyone would mistake her for fun. Milo opened the door a cautious crack. "Mrs. Durn," she shoved a clipboard into his face. "Your unit has contaminated the recycling bin." Milo blinked. What?" Mrs. Durn jabbed the clipboard. "Category, organic matter. Quantity, excessive. Description, skulls." Milo's mouth did a thing where it tried to become a smaller mouth. "Those are not my skulls," Milo said quickly. Mrs. Durn narrowed her eyes. "Whose skulls are they?" Milo considered lying. Lying is also a survival skill. Unfortunately, Gorehack returned at that exact moment. He carried the empty trash bag. He also carried the building's recycling bin. He had ripped it out of its mounting and was holding it like a basket, cheerful as a man bringing in groceries. "I did it! I sorted it!" Mrs. Durn froze. Gorehack tilted the bin toward her proudly. Inside were several skulls, clean, polished, and arranged by size. On top was a small label, carefully written in block letters. "Recycling. Bones. Assorted." Mrs. Durn's jaw tightened. "Those do not go in recycling." Gorehack looked confused. "They're usable." Mrs. Durn hissed, "Not in a communal bin." Gorehack's shoulders sagged like a punished child who had tried his best and crushed the wrong thing. "I can put them in compost," he offered. Mrs. Durn's eyes did something that suggested she was mentally completing a prayer. "No," she said, "no, you cannot. Skulls go nowhere. Skulls go in—" "No," she said, "no, you cannot. Skulls go nowhere. Skulls go in—" Gorehack perked up. "On a throne?" Mrs. Durn snapped, "Incinerator chute, now." Gorehack nodded immediately. "Yes, compliance officer." He turned, carried the bin like a dutiful worker, and marched down the corridor. Mrs. Durn shoved a bright orange sticker onto Milo's poster without even entering the unit. "One warning: improper waste sorting. Then she leaned closer, voice low. "And your unit," she said, "owes the building a new recycling bin." Milo whispered, "He didn't mean." Mrs. Durn cut him off. "He never means. That's the problem." She left. Milo closed the door slowly, stared at the sticker chart, and watched his future evaporate. Gorehack returned a minute later, empty-handed, and said, "I apologize. I thought I was helping." Milo rubbed his face. "Where did you even get the skulls?" Gorhak looked slightly embarrassed. "I have them," he said, as if this was a normal answer, like in my pocket. "You just have skulls?" "Yes." "How many?" Gorhak hesitated. "Do you want the number including small decorative skulls, or only the functional ones?" Milo sat down very carefully, like his legs had resigned. That should have been the end of it. A warning sticker, a new bin fee, a quiet, tense truce where Milo never asked about skull inventory again. But then quiet hours arrived. At 20:58, Milo pointed at the clock and said, "Okay, at 21, no loud noises, no machinery, no chanting." Gorehack nodded seriously. "I will be silent." At 20:59, Gorehack pulled out his chain axe. Milo's voice climbed several octaves. "What are you doing?" Gorehack said, "I am preparing my dinner." Milo glanced at the hot plate. "You can use the hot plate." Gorehack said, "Yes, but I also have sauce." He produced the peanut paste jar. Milo stared. "You can open it." Gorehack said, "I cannot. It is too powerful." Milo stepped forward and tried the lid. It did not budge. Milo grunted, twisted, and muttered a prayer to the machine god he did not mean. The lid did not budge. Gorehack watched politely, hands behind his back, like a gentleman observing a small animal attempt to lift a rock. Milo finally gasped, "Okay, fine. Use something." Gorehack nodded, delighted. He touched the jar with one hand, lifted the chain axe with the other, and revved it. The sound filled the unit like a metallic roar. Down the corridor, a baby cried. Somewhere, a servo skull fainted. Milo lunged for the off switch, but Gorehack had already brought the chain axe down with surgical precision. The jar exploded. Peanut paste decorated the ceiling in a broad, abstract arc. Gorehack held up the remaining half of the jar proudly. "Open!" Milo stared at the peanut paste dripping down the wall. He stared at the clock, which clicked to 2100 as if making a point. He stared at the sticker chart. From outside, a hammering began. Mrs. Durn's voice thundered through the door. "Quiet hours!" Gorehack looked at Milo, alarmed. "I have failed the goal." Milo, in the way of a man deciding between two disasters, said, "Turn it off, turn it off, turn it off." Gorehack turned the chain axe off immediately. Silence fell, except for the peanut paste plopping gently onto the floor. Mrs. Durn hammered again. "This is your final warning." Milo opened the door a crack. "It was an accident." Mrs. Durn glared past him, eyes catching on Gorehack. Her face tightened into the expression of someone who has just realized the universe contains new paperwork. "You," she said to Gorehack, "are not on the tenant registry." Gorehack said, "I am a room friend." Mrs. Durn said, "You are a hazard." Gorehack said, "I am learning." Mrs. Durn's gaze snapped to Milo. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., compliance office. Bring identification, lease documents, and whatever permits that is." She jabbed a finger toward the chain axe. Gorehack looked at the chain axe, then said quietly, "I do not have a permit." Mrs. Durn's eyes gleamed with grim satisfaction. "I thought so." She marched away. Milo shut the door and slid down it like a man in a tragic opera, except the opera involved peanut paste and housing policy. Gorehack crouched beside him, which for Gorehack was like a tank lowering itself to comfort you. "I am sorry," Gorehack said. "I wanted to make a nice meal for bonding." Milo managed, "You could bond by not destroying food?" Gorehack nodded sullenly. "I will try a different method." He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small brass skull. He offered it to Milo. Milo stared. "It is traditional," Gorehack said, "a friendship token." Milo took it because refusing a gift from a world eater felt like an advanced form of suicide. The skull was surprisingly well made, almost cute if you were the kind of person who found bones comforting. Milo whispered, "Thanks." Gorehack's voice softened somehow. "You are welcome, small room friend." And that, tragically, was when Milo started to believe this could work. The next morning, they went to the compliance office. Habstack 19's compliance office was a repurposed broom closet with a counter and a portrait of the Emperor that looked disappointed. Mrs. Durn sat behind the counter with her clipboard, her sticker sheets, and the smug calm of someone who knows the rules and enjoys watching them hurt people. Milo laid down his lease papers. "Okay, look, he's paying rent, he's quiet." Gorehack stood very still, like a giant trying to be furniture. Mrs. Durn flipped through the papers and clicked her tongue. "Subletting without Form 88B. Unauthorized occupant, unlicensed chain weapon, improper waste sorting, noise violation." Milo said, "The noise violation was a jar." Mrs. Durn peered at him. "A jar?" "Yes," Milo insisted, "a very stubborn jar." Mrs. Durn's gaze moved to Gorehack. "Do you have any proof of identity?" Gorehack reached for his belt pouch. Milo flinched because belt pouches on berserkers often contain things no one wants to see in an office setting. Gorehack produced a laminated card. He held it delicately between two enormous fingers. It read, "Gorehack, occupation, warrior, retired-ish. Current goals, improve self, reduce unplanned yelling. Emergency contact, ask Khorne, do not actually ask Khorne." Mrs. Durn stared. "This is not an Imperial identification." Gorehack said, "The lamination is very good." Mrs. Durn pinched the bridge of her nose. "You need an occupancy permit." Milo perked up. "Great, how do we get one?" Mrs. Durn smiled the way a guillotine smiles. "You submit Form 88B with proof of employment, proof of identity, proof of non-heresy, and a written statement that your occupant will follow quiet hours." Milo nodded eagerly. "We can do that." Mrs. Durn held up a finger. "And you will need Form 12K." Milo's enthusiasm faltered. "What's 12K?" Mrs. Durn said, "Residential weapons storage." Milo looked at Gorehack's chain axe. "It's for jars." Mrs. Durn said, "That is not better." Gorehack raised a hand. "I can store it outside." Mrs. Durn snapped, "No, that violates Corridor Safety Statute 4. Gorehack said, "I can put it in a box." Mrs. Durn said, "You cannot fit it in a box." Gorehack thought hard. "I can get a bigger box." Mrs. Durn's eyes narrowed. "Do not bring a bigger box into this." Milo said, "Okay, forms. We'll do forms." Mrs. Durn shoved a stack of parchment across the counter that landed with the weight of despair. "Fill these out," she said, "in black ink. No blood, no chanting while writing." Gorehack asked politely, "Can I use red ink?" Mrs. Durn said, "Absolutely not." Gorehack sighed the sigh of a man denied his artistic preferences. They left with the forms. But then the building announced Imperial Inspection Week. A Vox speaker crackled to life in the corridor at 11, blaring a cheerful tone that felt like it had been designed by someone who hated happiness. "Attention, loyal citizens," it announced. "By order of the Adeptus Administratum, Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Holy Ecclesiarchy, this habstack will undergo routine inspection for compliance, purity, and general disappointment." Milo froze mid-step. Gorehack tilted his helmet. "Disappointment?" The Vox continued. "Inspectors will visit units at random. Do not hide contraband. Do not lie. Do not attempt to distract inspectors with unlicensed baked goods. Thank you for your cooperation. The Emperor protects." The Vox clicked off. Milo whispered, "We're dead." Gorehack said, "No, that is later." Milo said, "They're going to see you." Gorehack looked thoughtful. "I can wear a hat." Milo stared. "A hat?" "Yes," Gorehack said, as if this solved everything. "A large one." Milo opened his mouth, closed it, and then said the only sensible thing he could think of. "Okay, we need a plan." Gorehack nodded eagerly. "Yes, plans are good. Plans prevent spontaneity." They attempted the forms first. Milo filled out Form 88B in neat handwriting because his mother had once told him penmanship was a path to virtue. Gorehack attempted to sign his name, but the pen snapped in his fingers. Milo handed him another pen. It snapped too. Milo handed him a marker. Gorehack made a mark that looked like a battle scar. "It is my signature," Gorehack said proudly. Milo hesitated. "It looks like a lightning bolt." Gorehack said, "Yes, it expresses my inner state." Milo said, "Can your inner state express legally recognizable?" Gorehack frowned, tried again, and produced something that resembled the word Gorhak if you were willing to forgive letters for being frightened. Then they tried Form 12K. This required listing the weapon's make, model, and spiritual temperament. Milo read aloud, "Is the weapon prone to unsolicited screaming?" Gorehack said, "Only when it is happy." Milo wrote, "Sometimes." Then they attempted proof of employment. Milo had none, because Milo's job was survive, and the Imperium does not issue pay stubs for that. Gorehack, surprisingly, had a letter. He produced a folded sheet of parchment stamped with a crude wax seal of a skull. It read, "To whom it may concern, Gorehack is currently on personal time. Do not summon him without snacks. Signed, someone important." Milo stared. "This is not," Gorehack said. "It is very official. It has a skull." Milo rubbed his temples. "Everything has a skull." Gorehack brightened. "Yes." So their plans shifted. If they couldn't make Gorehack legal, they would make him invisible. They tried the hat first. Milo found a battered maintenance helmet in a cupboard and set it on Gorehack's head. It sat there like a teacup on a fortress. Milo said, "Now you look like a maintenance worker." Gorehack's voice rumbled with pride. "I am contributing to infrastructure." Then the inspectors arrived early, because in the Imperium, the only thing more reliable than bureaucracy is bureaucracy arriving when you least want it. A knock sounded at the door. Not Mrs. Durn's furious hammering, a polite knock. Milo's blood ran cold, because no one in Habstack 19 knocked politely unless they were about to ruin your life with a smile. Milo opened the door. On the threshold stood an administratum inspector with a thin mustache and a thicker pile of documents. Beside him hovered a mechanicus adept, half hidden under robes and cables, accompanied by a small servo skull carrying a stamp pad. Behind them loomed an ecclesiarchy deacon holding a censer that puffed incense like nervous breathing. The inspector smiled pleasantly. "Unit 19, Delta 6, he said. "Random inspection. Don't worry, we're here to help." Milo nearly fainted. The inspector stepped in. eyes scanning the room, noticing the cot, the hot plate, the sticker chart, and the peanut paste stains on the ceiling. He nodded approvingly. Good. Minimal personal expression. His gaze landed on Gorhak. Gorhak stood perfectly still, wearing the tiny maintenance helmet, hands folded politely. The inspector paused. "And this is?" Milo's brain sprinted and fell down a stairwell. "That's my cousin," Milo blurted. Hank." Gorhak said loudly, "I am Gorhak." Milo hissed, "Cousin name." Gorhak corrected himself. "I am Gorehack." The inspector blinked. The Mechanicus adept leaned closer, Vox grill clicking. Vox grill clicking. Biosignature extremely angry. Metal content high. Probability of being a cousin low. Milo laughed in a way that sounded like begging. "He's from my mother's side." The ecclesiarchy deacon raised the sensor and squinted. "I sense issues." Gorhak said earnestly, "I am working on myself." The inspector held up a hand. "Excellent. Self-improvement is a civic virtue." Milo stared. The inspector stepped to the sticker chart. "Oh, I do love these," he said, brightening. "Clear metrics. The Emperor adores metrics." He counted the stickers. There was one warning sticker. He smiled. "Only one. Very good." Mrs. Durn would have screamed at that sentence. The inspector said it like he was complimenting a child's drawing. Then the servo skull drifted toward the corner, where the chain axe rested. The Mechanicus adept made a distressed clicking noise. "Unregistered chain weapon, residential zone. This is a violation of..." The inspector waved a hand. "Let's not jump to forms yet." Milo's ears perked at yet, which is the word that usually means your happiness has a countdown. The inspector approached the chain axe and cleared his throat. "Is this," he asked politely, "used for occupational purposes?" Milo said, "Yes." Gorhak said, "Yes." The inspector said, "Such as..." Milo's mouth opened. Gorhak answered proudly, "Jars." A silence fell, so complete it felt like the room had been muted by the Emperor himself. The ecclesiarchy deacon frowned. "Jars?" Gorhak nodded. "Stubborn ones." The Mechanicus adept optics word, "Inefficient method." Gorhak said with sudden intensity, "It is very efficient." Milo watched his life flash before his eyes, and it was mostly unpaid rent and questionable sausage. But then the inspector laughed, a real laugh, a human laugh, a laugh that suggested he had once been alive before paperwork took him. "Oh," the inspector said, wiping his eye, "I understand completely. My wife has a jar of pickled grox tongues that has outlived 3 assistants." Milo stared. The inspector leaned in conspiratorially. "Would you mind?" Milo said, "Mind what?" The inspector produced a sealed jar from his satchel like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, except the rabbit was bureaucracy. The label read, "Official inspection snacks. Do not open without authorization." The inspector said, "It's been on my desk for 6 months." The Mechanicus adept said sharply, "Unauthorized." The inspector said, "Hush, for morale." He held the jar out toward Gorhak. Gorhak looked at Milo for permission. Milo, who had no idea what reality was anymore, nodded. Gorhak lifted the jar gently, placed it on the counter, and did not touch the chain axe. Instead, he took a deep breath. He opened the emotional regulation pamphlet, flipped to a page, and read aloud. "When you feel strong urges, try using your hands carefully and counting to 10. Gorhak stared at the jar. He began counting. 1, he said, gripping the lid. 2, he said, twisting carefully. 3, he said, jaw clenched. 4, he said, making a noise like a distant engine. 5, he said, still twisting. At 6, the lid popped off cleanly. No explosion, no roar, no peanut paste sealing incident. Just open. The inspector gasped like he'd witnessed a miracle. The ecclesiarchy deacon made the sign of the Aquila automatically. The mechanicus adept muttered, unexpectedly elegant. Gorhak held up the open jar with quiet pride. I am improving, he said softly. Milo's heart did something unfamiliar. Hope. Then, because the universe hates hope, Mrs. Durn stormed into the corridor outside and shouted, Inspectors, Unit 19 Delta 6 has an illegal occupant and bones. The inspector sighed. There it is. He stepped to the door and opened it calmly. Mrs. Durn froze mid-rant at the sight of the officials. Her expression shifted instantly into a respectful grimace. Inspector, she said, voice suddenly sweet, I have concerns. The inspector nodded. Yes, we've heard about the bones. Mrs. Durn leaned forward eagerly. Exactly, the inspector said. Improper waste sorting is a plague, truly. Mrs. Durn blinked. Yes, also the occupant. The inspector glanced back at Gorehack, who stood politely with the jar of inspection snacks. Gorehack offered the jar toward Mrs. Durn. Would you like a snack? He asked. Mrs. Durn stared at the jar, then at Gorehack's helmet, then at the chain axe, then at the sticker chart, as if trying to calculate how many forms a panic attack required. The inspector said gently, Mrs. Durn, is it? Mrs. Durn nodded stiffly. The inspector smiled. Your compliance work is admirable, but in this unit I see improvement. I see domestic efforts. I see sticker engagement. Mrs. Durn's eyes flicked to the warning sticker. They have a violation? The inspector waved a hand. One sticker is nothing. The Emperor forgives small mistakes. This sentence caused the ecclesiarchy deacon to cough violently into his sleeve, as if expelling the concept. The inspector continued, However, there is an issue we cannot ignore. Milo's stomach dropped. Here it comes, the guillotine smile. The inspector held up Milo's lease papers. A Form 88B, he said, is missing a witness signature. Milo stared. That's the issue? The inspector nodded gravely. Regulations are regulations. Mrs. Durn looked personally betrayed by reality. The inspector pulled out a pen. We can solve this now. Mrs. Durn, would you witness? Mrs. Durn opened her mouth, closed it, then said, yes. She signed, hands trembling. The servo skull stamped the form with a satisfying thunk. The inspector smiled brightly. There, legal sublet. No need for unpleasantness. Milo's jaw hung open. The mechanicus adept said, Chain weapon. The inspector said, yes, that. He turned to Gorehack. You'll need a residential weapon storage permit. Gorehack nodded. I will do it. The inspector said, Excellent. Until then, keep it in a box. Gorehack said, A bigger box. The inspector, without missing a beat, said, A bigger box. The ecclesiarchy deacon peered at Gorehack. And you, your spiritual alignment. Gorehack said politely, I am trying to be calm. The deacon hesitated, then, perhaps moved by the open jar, perhaps by the sticker chart, perhaps by the sheer absurdity of life, said, Very well, pray quietly. Gorehack nodded. I pray internally. The inspectors left. Mrs. Durn lingered in the corridor, staring at Milo's unit like it had betrayed the very concept of enforcement. Finally, she hissed, "If he sorts one more skull into recycling, I will personally request a purity audit." Milo managed, "Noted." Mrs. Durn stormed away. The door shut. Milo turned slowly to Gorhak. Gorhak held up the open jar again. "I did not use the axe," he said, proud and slightly amazed. Milo breathed out. You did it." Gorhak nodded. "The pamphlet helped." Milo said, "So you're actually working on yourself?" Gorhak said, "Yes." Milo stared at the sticker chart. He peeled off the backing of a fresh sticker, one of the rare green ones labeled Good Behavior, and placed it on the chart. Gorhak watched, reverent. "What does it mean?" Gorhak asked. Milo said, "It means you didn't destroy anything during quiet hours." Gorhak's shoulders lifted slightly, like a man receiving a medal. "More goals," he whispered. And for a few days, it was almost normal. Almost. Gorhak learned to open jars with his hands and counting. Milo learned to label food clearly because Gorhak took "do not eat" as a challenge. Gorhak attended his support circle and came back with a slightly less intense stare. He even helped around the unit. He swept the floor with a broom held delicately between two armored fingers, humming a low, ominous tune that Milo decided counted as quiet. But then the trash problem returned, because the Imperium is full of problems that return, like taxes and sermons. Milo came home one evening to find Gorhak standing proudly beside the new recycling bin. Inside were no skulls. Instead, there was a neat stack of flattened cardboard. Milo blinked. "You learned?" Gorhak nodded. "Yes, I studied the bin labels." Milo peered closer and noticed each piece of cardboard had a small brass skull sticker on it. "Why did you put skull stickers on the cardboard?" Milo asked. Gorhak said, "To encourage it." Milo sighed. "Cardboard doesn't need encouragement." Gorhak looked deeply offended on cardboard's behalf. "Everyone needs encouragement." Milo opened his mouth to argue. Then he noticed the main trash chute in the corridor had been decorated with skulls. Not real ones, brass ones, small ones, tasteful ones. There was even a sign, "Trash chute, feed daily." Milo stared. "Gorhak." Gorhak said, "I made it friendly." Milo pinched the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Durn is going to—" A scream echoed down the corridor. Not a terror scream, a bureaucratic scream. Mrs. Durn appeared, saw the decorated chute, and made a noise like a filing cabinet collapsing. "What is this?" she shrieked. Gorhak stepped out politely. "Decorations." Mrs. Durn shook. "You can't decorate the trash chute." Gorhak frowned. "Why not?" Mrs. Durn's eyes darted to the sticker chart visible through Milo's open door. She saw the green stickers, more than one. Her anger faltered, threatened by evidence. Then she recovered and hissed, "New policy, no skull imagery in common areas. It upsets the children." Milo opened his mouth to ask, "What children?" Because Habstack 19 had the demographic profile of a haunted tool shed. But Gorhak nodded immediately. "I respect the children." Mrs. Durn said triumphantly, "Remove it." Gorhak looked genuinely torn. Then he said softly, "Can I replace it with stars?" Mrs. Durn hesitated. "Stars?" Gorhak nodded. "Small ones, for encouragement." Mrs. Durn's face twitched, as if she'd glimpsed a future full of star stickers and had to decide if it was worse than skulls. Finally, she snapped, "Fine, stars, but no sharp edges and no chanting." Gorhak nodded. "No chanting." Mrs. Durn marched away, muttering, "I hate this building." Milo stared at Gorhak. "You just negotiated with Mrs. Durn." Gorhak said, "Yes, I used my calm voice." Milo said, "And it worked." Gorhak said, "Yes." Milo laughed, because if he didn't laugh, he would start screaming, and screaming was worth 2 stickers. Then, of course, Madame Clasp returned, because rent is not the only thing that manifests. Madame Clasp appeared in Milo's doorway without knocking, holding her slate like a weapon. "I have heard," she said, "that you have an unauthorized occupant." Milo's heart sank again. Here we go. Milo said quickly, "He's authorized now. Form 88B signed." Madame Clasp's eyes narrowed. "By me?" Milo hesitated. Madame Clasp smiled slowly. "Not by you." Milo said, "Mrs. Durn witnessed—" Madame Clasp waved that away like a fly. "Mrs. Durn isn't a landlord." Gorehack stepped forward. "He pays rent!" Madame Clasp looked up at Gorehack, unimpressed, which was almost impressive in itself. "He pays rent," she agreed, "therefore I will raise the rent." Milo sputtered. "You can't—" Madame Clasp tapped her slate. "New fee, unusual tenant surcharge." Milo said, "That's not real." Madame Clasp said, "It is now." Gorehack tilted his helmet. "You are threatening my room friend." Madame Clasp said, "I am conducting business." Gorehack said very calmly, "I do not like your business." Madame Clasp sniffed. "Then you can leave." Milo's blood ran cold. Gorehack stood very still. The air felt suddenly thinner, as if the room remembered what Gorehack was. Then Gorehack did something unexpected. He reached into his pouch and pulled out the emotional regulation pamphlet. He opened it to a page. He read aloud, slowly, like a man sounding out letters. "When someone upsets you," Gorehack read, "try using 'I feel' statements." He looked at Madame Clasp. "I feel," Gorehack said carefully, "that you are a parasite." Madame Clasp stiffened. "Excuse me?" Gorehack flipped the page. "Avoid insults," he read. He nodded. "Yes, sorry." He tried again. "I feel," he said, "that this rent increase is unfair and makes my room friend sad." Milo's eyes widened. Gorehack was doing feelings. Madame Clasp scoffed. "Feelings aren't currency." Gorehack nodded. "True, but I also have currency." He produced another clinking sack. Madame Clasp's eyes lit up. Gorehack held the sack out, then pulled it back. Madame Clasp's smile froze. Gorehack said, "I will pay the current rent, not the new one." Madame Clasp's voice sharpened. "Then I will report you. Our bites will come. They will remove you." Gorehack nodded calmly. "Yes, they may try." Madame Clasp's eyes flicked to the chain axe. Gorehack noticed and said, "I will not use that. It is quiet hour soon." Milo stared. Quiet hours had become Gorehack's anchor, a terrifying, adorable anchor. Madame Clasp's mouth tightened. "You can't threaten me." Gorehack said, "I am not threatening. I am stating a likely outcome. Very different." Madame Clasp glared at Milo. "This is your problem." Then she left, cloak snapping behind her like a judge's robe. Milo slumped onto the cot, dizzy with relief and dread. Gorehack sat beside him carefully, causing the cot to creak like it was considering retirement. "I did well?" Gorehack asked, uncertain. Milo whispered, "You negotiated rent." Gorehack nodded slowly, absorbing the idea. Milo said, "Yes, you did well." Gorehack's shoulders lifted again, proud. Then he leaned forward and whispered, as if confessing a secret, I did not put any skulls in recycling today." Milo laughed helplessly. He peeled another green sticker and placed it on the chart. Gorhak watched like it was sacred. And that is when the absurd resolution arrived. Not with violence, not with glory, with bureaucracy. The next day, the inspector returned, alone this time, holding a fresh stack of papers. He entered Milo's unit like a man visiting friends. "Good news," he said cheerfully. "We've created a new classification." Milo blinked. "A new what?" The inspector smiled. "Your room late." Gorehack stood politely. The inspector read from the top sheet. "By minor authority granted under Housing Adjustment Clause 77 Theta," he said, Gorhak, whichever, "will be registered as—" He paused for effect because bureaucrats love drama even when they pretend they don't. "A Decorative Veteran Appliance." Milo stared. "A what?" The inspector beamed. "It's brilliant! He's not a tenant, he's not a weapon, he's not a hazard." The Mechanicus would have objected, but the Mechanicus was not present. This is how most Imperial policy works. The inspector continued. "He is officially a multi-purpose domestic unit providing jar access services, morale enhancement through sticker participation, and optional hallway security." Gorehack asked, quietly, "Am I appliance?" The inspector nodded eagerly. "Yes! Think of it as job security." Gorehack considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I have been many things. I can be appliance." Milo said, "Does this fix the rent?" The inspector flipped a page. "It does. Appliances are protected under subsidized utility regulation." Milo's mouth opened slowly. "So, my World Eater roommate is now legally a toaster." The inspector corrected. "More like a blender." Gorehack said, proudly, "I am very good at blending." Milo remembered the peanut paste ceiling and decided not to argue. The inspector handed Milo a final paper. "And one more thing," he said. "Because he is an appliance, his operational noise can be scheduled." Milo blinked. "Scheduled?" The inspector nodded. "Yes, if the chain axe is used only during officially sanctioned appliance hours, it will not count against quiet hours." Milo felt something inside him loosen. Mrs. Durn's sticker system had found a loophole. Gorhak perked up. "I can use the axe again?" Milo said quickly. "During appliance hours." Gorhak nodded. "I like rules." The inspector smiled. "Everyone likes rules. That's why we have so many." He left. Milo stared at the papers. Then he looked at the sticker chart. Then he looked at Gorhak. Gorhak looked back, hopeful. Milo took a fresh sticker, shiny gold, very rare. He placed it carefully at the top of the chart. It read, "Exceptional compliance." Gorhak inhaled like he was about to cry, which would have been uncomfortable for everyone, including the ceiling. "Thank you, small room friend," he said softly. "I will continue to improve." Milo nodded. "And you'll take out the trash properly?" Gorhak nodded eagerly. "Yes, stars only." Milo leaned back on his cot, listening as the vent whispered its little prayers, and for the first time in months, he felt something close to safe. Then, in the corridor, a jar clinked. Mrs. Durn's voice shouted, "Who has a stuck lid?" Gorehack stood, straightened his tiny helmet, and spoke with calm authority. "Appliance hours begin in 5 minutes," he called back. Milo smiled. Somewhere in the hive, cosmic horrors prowled, but in Unit 19 Delta 6, the worst terror of the day had been solved by a sticker chart, a pamphlet, and a legally recognized loophole, which, if you think about it, is the most imperial ending possible. End of recording. Case filed under domestic compliance, when the appliance is also a war crime. Lesson learned: if you can't fight the system, become a protected category inside it, and always schedule your jar violence.